So, the Chargers had a very interesting free agency so far. Sure, they didn't really go on a spending spree, but a lot happened. And every one of those moves needs a letter grade. So let's go over all the trades, departures, signings, resignings, releases, restructures, and comp picks. Since, they actually got some this time around. Overall, I'm giving an A to my viewers, who have been really amazing lately. But to all of them who aren't subscribed, I'm giving a D-. And subscribers are obviously S tier. So let's start this very thorough Chargers free agency grades video with the signings. The most high-profile signing, if you could call it that, is Gus Edwards, formerly of the Baltimore Ravens. He didn't sign for big money. It was about $3 million APY, but it was a significant move because it showed the Chargers were moving on from Ekeler and designing the offense around what Greg Roman does. In Roman's offense, the power back had his best seasons according to PFF. Overall, he has a 4.9 yards per carry for his career too. However, he is pretty limited when it comes to the receiving side of the game, and he's not particularly explosive. For example, in terms of breakaway rate, he was 41st in the league last year. And even if you adjust for minimum attempts, he's still far below someone like the much maligned Najee Harris, a fellow power back. I would have preferred splurging a little bit and getting Josh Jacobs, especially now considering they did make that cap space. And yes, he would have cost them comp picks, but as we've seen, it didn't really get them that much anyway, but more on that in a bit. I would have preferred someone with more upside as opposed to a more workman-like guy like Edwards, but still, nonetheless, he's a good player and I think he'll fit into what they're doing, so I can't give it anything less than a B+. Next up, we've got Will Disley, tight end. I gotta say, I like this pickup a lot. Last season, he posted some solid run blocking and pass blocking grades for the Seahawks, and the Chargers could use some help in that department, and I think he'll fit in well with the Roman offense. It's not the same as they ran in Seattle, but there definitely is some overlap. Also, I did pick him up in fantasy in 2019, so I remember his really hot start to that season. Based on his 5-game average, he would have ended the year with over 800 yards and probably 8 touchdowns. Obviously, prorating stats is a bit of a fool's errand, but I still wonder if he had that potential. Perhaps it was sapped by the Achilles injury he suffered that year? Who knows? And it's unlikely he rediscovers it, but it at least gives you some upside to your typical blocking tight end signing. I give this one an A-. Hayden Hurst, who I always call Hunter Hurst by accident, is a former first-round pick, though I don't really see the upside. He was quickly usurped by Mark Andrews, who was a third-round pick in the same year, and he always seemed like an overdraft, considering his, RAS score wasn't that impressive even. And he hasn't really distinguished himself as a blocker at any point. So other than being familiar with Roman's offense, and by that I mean being familiar to losing playing time in it, is really the most that he brings to the table. And, maybe he can help some of the new players to the offense adjust, but I also think he's a pretty good candidate to get cut. So I'm going to give this one a C-. Next up, we got Kristian Fulton, a corner, who played for Tennessee last year. He's a former second rounder with some decent size, though arm length isn't the greatest, but overall pretty good athlete. He ran a 4.46 at the combine at almost 200 pounds and received an 8.0 RAS score. These are not eye-popping numbers, but solid. And that's important to remember when you look at his stats or PFF grades, which I wouldn't even recommend doing. With this pickup, you can't really look at what he's done in the NFL so far, but rather speculate what his press man skills could be like in a Jesse Minter defense. So I'd have to give the signing a B+. With Corey Lindsley basically retiring, the Chargers decided to pick up Bradley Bozeman, a center who recently had the pleasure of playing for a team owned by David Tepper. But before that, he was a Raven, and he obviously is familiar with Greg Roman and the offense. Overall, this is a quality pickup by the Chargers, not because of the familiarity even, but because he has a lot of versatility. He's not just a center, he could also kick in the guard, so that doesn't make him an automatic cut if a center gets drafted and shows a lot in training camp. The former 6th-rounder hasn't shown much during his career, but he's been solid and reliable. He also didn't come with much of a price tag and has a cap hit of less than $1 million. So overall, I give this signing a A-, mainly for the versatility that it gives the Chargers moving forward. Next up, we have former Charger Denzel Perryman signing with the Chargers. The veteran thumper has had a solid career and impressively has managed to carve out a career into his 30s, which is kind of hard as a linebacker, especially when you're 240 pounds and are basically on the field just to hit guys as hard as you can. He's not going to give the Chargers much in terms of coverage ability, but at least he'll have a linebacker who likes to tackle, unlike a guy like Kenneth Murray. And overall, just having that presence and making teams question whether or not they want to go in that area is worth it. I'll give this one an A, because it definitely shows the culture is going to be different, and they're going to be hitting guys in the mouth as much as they can. The Chargers' defensive tackle room is not much to look at, but adding Poona Ford does help. He's a big body presence with some pass rush and run defense capabilities, who showed a lot of promise early in his career, but hasn't as much recently. Some of that might be injuries, but either way, he's a pretty solid, if unspectacular pickup, who, if Jesse Minter can get him to tap into his early career form, could be a steal. I'll give this one an A. Last up we have in terms of signings is Troy Dye, a linebacker, formerly of the Vikings. Ryan Ficken, the Chargers special team coordinator, coached him when he was with Minnesota, though the Chargers team site claims that he has upside and can potentially be a factor on defense. I don't know about that, considering he's not exactly the greatest athlete, but then again, he does get praised for his football IQ. Overall, I'll give the signing a B because I think he's just mostly going to be special teams fodder, but I'll give the Chargers a bonus A+ for retaining Ficken, because usually coaches, when they come in, they have to bring in their own guys, and Harbaugh doing that really is a good sign. Right, now let's go over some of the re-signings. The most high profile being, obviously, Cameron Dicker, who, if you're into post-irony, was definitely the Chargers MVP last year. I give this move an A+. The next most high profile re-signing is Aloy Gilman. The strong safety who plays a lot of free safety carries an affordable cap hit of over $3.3 million. It obviously would have been nice to acquire a free safety with more upside, but those don't exactly grow on trees. The fact is that they kept him at a decent cap number tells you something about how he wasn't the problem with that terrible Chargers defense. And I think he has a chance to excel with Minter this year, and maybe even bring in a pretty nice comp pick soon. I give it an A-. So the Chargers re-signed Easton Stick. Did he show he was a capable NFL backup last year? I guess. But the real reason is he's buddies with Justin Herbert and apparently helps him break down tape, whatever. I guess I'll give this a B, which I think is generous, but I guess he deserves it considering he did help the Chargers get the 5th overall pick. And if they somehow luck their way into Marvin Harrison, he deserves a statue. The Chargers also re-signed Foster Sarrell, the once highly touted tackle out of Stanford. Hasn't really distinguished himself as a pro, but he hasn't been that bad. According to the WAS score, which is proprietary to Football Threat, wins above Storm, as in Storm Norton. Foster Sarrell is comfortably above, for the sole reason that he doesn't fall on his ass all the time. For that, I give this re-signing a B-. Now let's take a look at the restructures. I'm going to do Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa together. Their last 2 seasons have definitely gone very differently for them. Bosa has struggled to stay on the field, whereas Mack has been very productive. That clearly hasn't changed the allure that these two guys being on the same field together has. It was enough that any lowball trades for Bosa weren't going to be accepted. Same with the aging Mack. I think one thing that's been lost in the Chargers conversation on the Chargers wide receiver room post-Keenan Allen trade is how deep they are when it comes to the edge position. It allows Thule to mix in more rather than be a focal point, and will open things up for the tackles in the middle. I have a feeling Harbaugh thinks he can keep Bosa healthy, which if he can, that could earn him Coach of the Year honors alone. I give the restructures of Mack and Bosa an A+. Yes, it comes with a lot of risk, because Mack is getting older and Bosa's injury prone, but in my opinion, edge is the second most important position on the field. If they can get to the quarterback consistently, even with a bad receiver room, they can make the playoffs. Next up, we have Corey Lindsley, which is only technically a restructure, since he's basically retired. It's sad to see him go because he was such a good center for such a long time, though not that long for the Chargers. But still, it's a good move, and it saves him some cap space when he retires later in the offseason. So let's talk about the one trade the Chargers made. I won't go into much detail about it because I did extensively in a video, which you can find the link for in the description. But obviously, I really like the move. I think it makes sense to get a 4th-round pick for a guy his age, and it sets up the Chargers well in the draft. It just makes sense to clear the decks in a season when there's a lot of good receivers available in the NFL draft. Here's hoping they take one of the 3 superstars with the 5th overall pick. I give the trade an A. Let's talk about the players who the Chargers released. Obviously, first is Mike Williams. The longtime Charger was always very underrated and always played under the shadow of Keenan Allen, so he never really got to have a true breakout season, but still had a pretty solid career for them. He has since landed with the Jets, and he's a really interesting pickup for someone like Aaron Rodgers who loves to favor guys in the end zone. I can see him playing like a Alan Lazard but good role. But even though he's still a good player, it was a sensible release. The Chargers for years have needed to build a wide receiver room with more speed, and it's kind of hard to do with guys like Mike Williams and even Keenan Allen around. It's going to be a fresh start that hopefully includes someone like Malik Neighbors. I give the release a B, because he could have still been a useful player technically, but moving on from him has definitely created a lot of flexibility moving forward. The Chargers also released Eric Kendricks. The former great linebacker did okay, and I guess you could argue he helped the Chargers with their run defense, but I think that was really just a product of them selling out, stop the run, because as we saw, their pass defense just was horrid last year. I think moving on from him and starting fresh in the linebacker room makes a lot more sense. I give this move a A-. All right, so let's go over the departures. Unless they haven't signed with anyone, I won't be counting them. First up, we've got Austin Ekeler. I was surprised with how many people were happy to see him go, mainly because people thought he was some sort of fantasy vulture. But regardless where his motivations lied, he always found a way into the end zone, which is more you could say about a lot of running backs they had during his time. Even if they hadn't signed Gus Edwards, they weren't going to get much of a comp pick for him anyway. And I think there's a world where they could have brought him back with Edwards. And yes, he's fading a little bit when it comes to being a running back, but Roman prefers to separate his receiving backs to his running backs. And I can see him being pretty useful as a receiver, especially with a lighter workload. So I got to give this one a C. Not the biggest loss for the Chargers, but I still think he could have been useful. Next up, we've got Austin Johnson, defensive tackle. It's hard to tell whose fault it was for how bad the defense was, at least player-wise, when you know really Staley was the culprit. But with that said, Austin Johnson isn't really a great player. In a vacuum, he's a solid run stuffer, but he's not exactly great either, so it's not the biggest loss. I give this one a B+. Just like Austin Johnson, Will Clapp sided with the Bills. With the Chargers, he was a reserve lineman, but he actually played quite a bit because of Lindsley's problems. And as far as backup centers, he acquitted himself pretty well. Considering he's not a Roman guy, it didn't really make sense to bring him back. So I give this move a B+. I think Jaylen Hawkins leaving is my sneaky, least favorite non-move from the Chargers this offseason. Hawkins isn't a great safety, but I like the hard-hitting style, and I think he would have fitted on a Harbaugh team. But regardless, this isn't a really significant move. So I just have to give it a B-. I'm sad to see Michael Davis go because I think he was definitely screwed over by Staley. Back in 2022, he showed that when you line him up as a press corner, he can be very effective. But since Staley is obsessed with free releases and getting mad at his players for not knowing who to take and match coverage, we saw what happened with Davis. Though he also moved to a Dan Quinn defense, so I'm interested to see how that works. But either way, his lack of versatility probably wasn't going to really work out with the Chargers, so I give this move a B+. Next up, we've got Kenneth Murray, who, believe it or not, Telesco traded up for in the first round to get. And the fact that Chargers Twitter is pretty stoked that they're going to get a 6th-round pick for him tells you everything you need to know about how his tenure went with the Chargers. There were always these sort of like rumors or whatever you want to call them that he was kind of like a favored child. That's why he was able to stay on the field. Not sure if that's true or not, but if it was, I'd say moving on from makes sense, especially if you want to build a winning team culture. So I give this move an A. Next up, we have Amon. I'm not going to bother pronouncing his last name. He's a fellow Canadian, so that's one thing. But it's hard to tell how good of a linebacker he is because he really hasn't played that much in the NFL. He's been largely a special teamer. Considering Ryan Ficken seems to be okay with letting him go, I'm okay with it too. I'll give this one a B-, and an F for me for the lack of effort in pronouncing his last name. Next up, we've got Gerald Everett, who I gotta say I'm kind of sad to see go. He always seemed very underutilized, considering how good he was yak-wise, but he never really earned back Herbert's trust after that interception in the KC game. Considering that, and also that they did get a comp pick for him, I'm not too upset about it, so I'll give this move a B+. Lastly, let's talk about how the Chargers did when it comes to comp picks. The haul was underwhelming, to say the least. Right now, it looks like 2 6s and 2 7s. 7th-round comp picks are basically just you can get guys before they hit UDFA. They don't really have much trade value. And 6s don't really either, but, well, maybe they can help them move up on a day 3 pick. But still, it's not nothing. These picks can be used to help with special teams and take chances on mercurial players. Also, comp picks really come down to other teams willing to pay for your guys, and the current management has no real responsibility for that. So, considering the hand they were dealt, I'll give them a B+. They were a bit handcuffed because they didn't really have a lot of high-priced free agents leaving, but I would have preferred seeing them being a bit more aggressive in free agency, considering the haul hasn't been that impressive, or at least as impressive as subscribing to the channel and liking this video and leaving a comment. Thanks again for watching.